things Sunday night. Hopefully I'm over whatever kind of a bug I may have had. But I'm glad to be back with you to continue our study of the life of Jesus. In our readings, we're in the book of Numbers, and we have the first 7 chapters of Numbers that are covered in our reading schedule for up to today. Numbers, the book itself, is what's it about in a sense?
Census.
The census, the numbering of the people, and it really deals with their wandering, but there's more to it than that. There's basically 3 sections of Numbers. The first 10 chapters carries with it the old generation that had seen everything that Moses had done, or God had done through Moses, the plagues down at Mount Sinai, and then after that, there is a generation that really passes on, the transition, the history of the journey from chapter 10, verse 11, when they actually leave Mount Sinai and go toward Kadesh Barnea, 13 and 14, where the spies are sent out, and then they return with an evil report, and God says, because you didn't believe that I could give you the land, for every day the spies were gone, you're going to do what? Wander in the wilderness for a year. And so what he did was he allowed that generation to do what? To die out, except, and the men able to bear arms 20 years of age and above, the only 2 who made it were Joshua and Caleb. And so there's that tragic transition, so to speak, from chapter 10 through chapter 21. And then in 22 through 26, you have a new generation, and we have the events. By that time, they come down to the plains of Moab, and they're poised, ready to cross into the promised land. And Moses goes up into Mount Nebo. Actually, on the plains of Moab, he gives these speeches that are covered in the next book, Deuteronomy. But let's just glance real quickly. The people are numbered and they're organized in Numbers 1 and 2. There is a number given that you can really take to the bank. In Numbers 146, the number of men who were able to bear arms were how many thousand? Numbers 146. That's right, 600, 3,550. There'll be a second numbering in the 26th chapter, and that number will have died out. There'll be another large number, but it'll be a different generation. So they're counted. The men of war are numbered in chapter 1, and then their encampments, their tribes, the appointment or the organization of Israel in chapter 1, and as well as chapter 2. And then in chapters 3 and 4, who are appointed to serve in the tabernacle. That's almost a gimme. That's right. The Levites are to serve in the tabernacle. And their particular duties are somewhat specified here. I'm looking in verse 27 of chapter 3. And of Kohath was the family of the Amramites, and these family, and where they were to line up. And Merari, verses 33 through 37, his family, and what they were to do. There was an orderliness to everything that God designed. And then in chapter 4, the various duties are outlined. We mentioned that. What they were to carry, not only where they were to line up, but what they were to do and how they were to do it. And then in 5 and 6, there's some repetition of various laws. Restitution for various trespasses. The American Standard has as topical reading, which is a pretty good summary rather of the chapter. And then in chapter 6, what do we have? The law of what? Did we find this? The Nazarite. Yeah, and that was if a woman had a husband, he dies, and what happens? There's no heir. And so the brother takes her to wife, and then rears that, but that's all a part of it. And then we have other things in chapter 6. There's a priestly blessing that we sing a song. If you look at the very bottom or the end of chapter 6, verse 24 through the end, the Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face to shine upon thee and be gracious to thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. So shall they put my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. This, we sing it, but it was actually a blessing that the priest would offer, likely on the Day of Atonement, but this is given, and it basically, we want the favor of God to come upon you. And then the 7th chapter, what do we have here? Anybody?
Responsibilities of leaders.
Okay, responsibilities of leaders, some of the sacrifices they would offer, and that continues on in even some of the animals that are specified. All right, any comment or question? All right, we'll pick up with 8, 9, and 10 on the Lord's Day morning. All goes well. But so keep in mind, Numbers, the organization of the people, the counting of the, just like the book, the word itself. All right, what I'd like for us to do now is to go back and pick up real briefly where we left off Sunday morning. Matthew 20, Mark 10, Luke 18. We're in the closing ministry. All right? True or false? Closing ministry? True, yes. All right. We want to remember that everything in the Bible story is pointing to Jesus. Manifest God gives us a tremendous example to try to follow, and dies a sacrificial death. And in all of that, there are these eras or epochs in his life. The years of what? Start. Years of preparation. And then when he's baptized, that begins the what? We call the beginning ministry. Primarily in what area of Israel? South, middle, central, or north?
He began in the area of Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem, Judea. That's right, south. All right? And that's 3 to 6 months. Then he goes north to Galilee, great Galilean ministry. For the better part of how long? Roughly. About 2 years. Then people have been following him for his signs and the miracles and the food and so on. And so he begins to do what? Retire, withdraw from the crowds. So periods of retirement, likely about 6 months. And then Luke 9:51, he set his face toward Jerusalem. So then we have Luke and John, primarily with the, this time that we've been talking about, the closing ministry, primarily in Luke and John, but we've been spending time where he's in Perea coming down, as we show on the map here. We've had him up in Luke 17. He's been between Samaria and Galilee. He goes across the river. And then we have all of these passages that we've been discussing in Matthew 19 and 20, because it says he was across the river. And as he's come down, we'll see, I don't know if we'll get to it tonight, we might, but Jesus will cross the river at some point and go over into Jericho. And right outside Jericho, he will heal Bartimaeus and a companion, and he'll go into Jericho and have actually go into the house of Zacchaeus. And then we'll have after that, he'll come on into Bethany, right outside Jerusalem, in the events of the last week. So that's where we are in the whole idea. All right, Jesus traveling through Perea taught on divorce and remarriage. Little children were brought to him. In the case with the rich young ruler, and really in Matthew's account, it continues on. The thought with the parable of the laborers in the what? In the vineyard. And that goes in 1:21 through 16. And then Jesus again foretold about his death, his resurrection in very, very specific terms, very minute details, how he would be delivered up to the chief priests and the rulers. And then they would condemn him. Well, that would be the indictment of the Sanhedrin. And they would mock him, spit on him, And then they would deliver him to the Gentiles or the Romans. He would be likewise mistreated by them. And then he would be scourged and then crucified. And then the third day, though, raised from the dead. And so that's so significant. Now, this is where we've been. We read these passages that are included in Matthew and Mark, where James and John, as well as their mother, come to Jesus. And what is their request?
One on the right hand, one on the left hand.
Yes, when you come in your glory, we would like one, she says, I'd like one to be on your right, the other on your left hand. And Jesus says, it's a done deal. Right?
It's not my
No,
fault.
it's not mine to give, but the Father. And he says, you really don't know what you're asking. And he says, I have this cup that I'm about to drink. Are you able? And they say,
Sure.
yes. And Mark's account includes in the baptism with which I'm baptized. Are you a? You know, they agree. The suffering that's about to come over him. And in that sense, they would be like Jesus. And then he gives them, let's just turn to it. Turn to Matthew's account, if you will. And we'll just note Matthew's. And then he makes the point in verses 24 and following. When the 10 heard it, that is about their desire for to be one on the left and right, they were moved with what? Displeasure, indignation concerning the two. But Jesus called them and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Not so shall it be among you. But whosoever would become great among you shall be your what? Servant. Or some translations have minister. And whosoever would be first among you shall be your slave or servant. Even, and then who does he put as the prime example to follow? Himself. Even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered to, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. I want to come back to that in just a moment, but let's answer our questions, and then I wanted to make some observations about some of these passages that I think are the passages just really beg for us to spend a little bit of time on them. All right, we didn't answer any of these at the bottom of page 52, did we? I didn't think so. Okay. All right, so he rebukes the selfish request of James and John. Who were the two apostles who came to Jesus with a request? I just told you. James and John. By the way, what family relationship did they sustain to each other? They were brothers, right. Their father was Zebedee. And we don't know this in so many words. We have to deduce from two passages, Matthew and Mark, concerning the women who were around the cross. But the mother of the two, of James and John, and the wife of Zebedee was named Salome. And she is with those women who come to the cross. And evidently just a tremendous woman. All right, well, I just answered pretty much that. Who was with them or related and most likely made their request for them? Their mother. When the request was that one might be on Jesus' right hand and the other when he came in his kingdom.
They still got the earthly king in mind.
Exactly. And seriously, you know, they talk about, who's going to be first. And we've already seen that, and it's been earlier, but in Matthew 18, which was, earlier than the time than what we're talking now, in Matthew 18, also Mark 10, or Mark 9 rather, what happened was they were arguing as they were coming from the north down to Capernaum, who's going to be what? Greatest. And Jesus took a little child and held him and said, except you repent or turn and become as this little child, you shall in no wise, you won't be a part of it. And he says, you've got to humble yourself as this child, and you've got to accept these disciples and turn yourself. So anyway, that's been a problem. It's continuing to be a problem. And really you can see how. If there's going to be a kingdom, and we've been following you, well, we'd like to be, as the fellow said, we'd like to be kingpins in the kingdom. We'd like to be right there in the thick of things. And that, if it were political, physical, they would have been. Jesus asked, are you able to drink the what? The cup that I'm able to drink. It referred to his suffering he was about to undergo, and they would experience suffering as they followed him as disciples. I've got a note on that that's not in your book. Did Jesus say he would grant them their request to have positions of prominence? No. What did their request cause among the other apostles? Indignation. State the verses. Well, Matthew is 20 verse what? 24. Mark, it's 10 verse 41. Good. Jesus said their desire for prominence was like unto whom? The Gentiles. Yeah, the Gentiles lorded over, and their rulers lorded over them, and their great ones are the ones who exercise authority over them. Ones who have power, money, prestige, those are the ones that people look up to. They've arrived, so to speak. Jesus explained that the true greatness comes by learning to be what? A servant. I will come back to that in a little bit. Whom does Jesus say we must be like? And this person was the greatest of servants in order to be great? Himself, Jesus Christ himself. One of the great prophecies of Jesus is in Isaiah, the latter part of 52, and really the whole 53rd chapter. And in all of that, he is really cited as the suffering servant. Whom did Jesus serve? Whom did he serve?
Mankind.
Well, he did serve mankind. That's true. He served the Father. He served the Father's will, but he came as to serve all of us, to provide for all of us. So that when you say, "Well, I'm a servant," that's almost, we think that's belittling. I'm not going to be. I've heard people say, "I'm not going to serve anybody. I'm not anybody's slave." Well, in a sense, we're serving God, and then we want to be able to serve the needs of others. And in that sense, we're servant to everybody, aren't we? Is it truthful to say we should be a servant to everybody, in that we're serving what is in their best interest? Sure. And that is so contradictory to most people's thinking in the world. And I will come back to this in just a second. Let's move on. Jonathan, we want to move through a couple of these. We went over this chart Sunday morning, and McGarvey made the point about he mentioned 7 of these specifics. And then where we are here. Here's what I want to, I've got about 3 or 4 points I want to make. The cup and the baptism Jesus referred to involve their suffering, similar to their uniting with Jesus in his suffering. And are you able to drink the cup with me? So there's almost a unity that in fact, you remember in Acts the 5th chapter, the last couple of verses, the apostles, after they were beaten before the Sanhedrin, they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer dishonor for his name. In other words, if we can just be spoken of in the same sentence with Jesus, that's all we need. And so being united with him. The word cup generally refers to a portion or a part that is assigned. You remember in Psalm 23, thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runs over. That all the good things, the portion that God had assigned David. But it can also, and can refer to pleasure or sorrow. Usually sorrow predominates, and we see this, if it be thy will, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. And several in Revelation deal with the same idea, others in Psalm, Isaiah, Jeremiah. McGarvey again says to be baptized. Now he said this cup, Mark mentions baptized. Are you able to be baptized with a baptism I'm baptized with. Was the suffering to be overwhelmed, to be engulfed? Metaphorical use of the word arising from the fact it means an immersion, just completely overwhelmed is a word we would use. And it's interesting to note that if you think about James and John specifically, James is the first to be martyred. Herod Agrippa I put him to death, you remember, in Acts the 12th chapter. And John lived to be old, but you'd have to say that in John's writings in 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, as well as Revelation, he was very the drift of the brethren that were going into really Gnosticism and other things. And so he was troubled over that, over the sorrow, over error among them. And then he, of course, mentions persecution in Revelation. So in essence, the cup and the baptism that Jesus, of course, not to the degree that he did, but there was a unity that they had with him through all that. Comment or question on any of that? All right, the second thing I wanted to mention, that this selfish ambition and or misunderstanding of the nature of the kingdom on the part of James, John, and their mother, and those are the passages that we can deduce that Salome was their mother. That misunderstanding, the ambition characterized the others also. The 10, since they were indignant over those two. Pride, or sometimes translation selfish ambition, in any organization causes antagonism and indignation. It can exist in schools, athletic teams, prisons, and even in local churches. It can exist among elders or prospective elders, deacons, Bible class teachers, song leaders, preachers. It can also exist over hurt feelings or slights. An overarching desire for an individual to help make whatever organization is under discussion better. That is, if you and I both, we want to help Pleasant Grove Church be the very best we can be, and we want it to thrive, then we have to exert effort on our own part. But it's not selfish effort, or, well, look at what I'm doing. It's looking what we wanting to do for souls. And there's a difference between individual ambition to help the cause or help something bigger than ourselves and selfish ambition. And when we have that, it strips a person of pride. Developing joy over the progress of others also helps. Paul talked about that in Philippians 1. We rejoice with them that rejoice. We're not saddened or jealous. We're happy when good things happen to other people or their families. And that's genuine love. Love is not puffed up, does not consider its own and so on. So those things help. I want to come back to just some of these things that came to mind immediately. Pride or selfish ambition can exist in athletic teams, and it's doing that more, I think, on the college level now with the NIL and all that. But when someone, it's all about me and look how good look what kind of a touchdown I scored or home run I hit, what does that sometimes breed in the minds of others? Resentment. Yeah. Who does he think he is? I can do some of that too. It's resentment. In prisons, I know, I wanted to just tell you about this real quickly. We studied with a fellow at Donaldson several years ago, and then all of a sudden he quit, and he wasn't coming. And one of the other fellows said, he thinks he's big stuff, and he's bigger than you, and he's bigger than our little group that we had studying there. He was made, not really a trustee, but he was kind of made over that particular dorm and answerable to the guards and so on. Can you imagine that? Here's a fellow who's in prison for life, and he's stricken with pride because he's over a little group right there in a. Can you imagine that? That was just astounded me. How in the world, when you are locked up for life, can you have pride about anything? I mean, it was a joke to me, but nonetheless, people. What about somebody who's in the 3rd grade, and he's proud of something he's got over somebody in the 2nd or the 1st grade? And you think, well, that's a joke. He's just a little fella. Well, it's all perspective. when you look from a bird's eye, you think, man, who do they think they are? They're nobodies. And then you think about people who are on athletic teams or president or come into local churches. You think, well, there's a little bit more heady here. And yet, when God looks down on us from heaven, it's almost like, though he sent Christ to die for us, we're still, as Isaiah talks about, basically worms of the dust. And there's just absolutely no room for pride anywhere in the kingdom. Matthew 5, in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the poor in what? Spirit. Theirs is the kingdom. Blessed are they that mourn. Blessed are the meek. They'll inherit the earth. All of those things strip pride. And again, when we see our own failures and see ourselves really from God's perspective, it usually takes all that away from us. We have very little to be proud about. Elders or prospective elders. Some of us heard people say, I'd give my right arm to be an elder. Really? Is it? Now, there's one thing about that. 1 Timothy 3, the first verse. If a man desires the office of a bishop, he desires a good work. I don't think that's any kind of a selfish thing there, but he desires that the work be done. And if he can, qualify to help it be fulfilled, then yes. But have any of you ever seen pride manifest itself in elderships or people who wanted to be elders? I have.
So you can't desire for prominence.
No, not for what's sake, but prominence. That's right. Yeah, not for your own self. It's like, hey, I really want the church to thrive. I want it to do well. If I'm qualified to work as an elder and people would like for me to serve, I'll do my best for the good of the church. But not look at me. I knew of a fellow who wanted to be an elder in a local group, a local church in North Alabama. And there was a preacher and 2 or 3 others who objected. They thought his wife wasn't exactly what she ought to be. Well, rather than just saying, I'll do what I can, he created a stink about it. He really did. And caused a little division. Some left, over it because that there were some who objected. I know another fellow who some wanted to be an elder, some objected. And he said, I'll just be happy to do what I can in whatever capacity that, that's the way it ought to be. And
This is exactly what we're talking about, being a servant.
exactly. Just serve, just do what I can for the congregation in whatever capacity that I find myself. Exactly right, David. You look like you're going to say something. Anyway, deacons the same way, Bible class teachers, songs. I know a fellow when we were living in a different place, and he said, I'll lead singing, but only on Sunday mornings. I thought, well, what about Sunday night? What about Monday night? What about Monday morning? What's the big deal? And I came to find out it was a matter of pride. He wanted to be there when most of the people, he wanted to leave when most of the crowd was there. Can you imagine that? It gets heady. It gets very heady sometimes. And people, there's just no place for it. No place for it. Preachers the same way. Some want to preach for, big church and big city, and not everybody's like that, I know. But I've heard some comments about some, and what disgusts me, people say, so-and-so got his position to preach. I can't, it's a life. It's supposed to be at least. And what position to preach? Can't you preach? What position do you have if you talk to your next door neighbor? What position is that? And I remember reading, I may have told you about this, where some young man came to David Lipscomb and was in his study there in Nashville, and he said, I'm just concerned that I don't have any place to preach. And Brother Lipscomb opened the shutter by his window, and smoke was coming from the various stacks, chimneys of the houses all around. And he said, all those are places you can preach. You can preach anywhere, people will listen to us. But they can happen. But these are a desire to help make whatever organization is. It doesn't matter if it's an athletic team, where Paula works at the grocery store. It doesn't matter where it is. Whatever organization we are a part of, if we help it to be the best it can be through our efforts and encourage others in doing their best, that's being ambitious, but it's not selfish ambition, and it strips us of our pride. And rather than being jealous, be joyful over progress others make, and that helps. But anyway, I think that passage here in Matthew 20 is so applicable for the way we think about things. Rather than how's this going to make me look, what can I do to try to help somebody else? And Jesus said, when you do, you're what in the kingdom? You're first. You're great. You're great in the kingdom. Okay. Another point I want to make. Years ago, let me pause this. Years ago, in the 80s, I was living out in Dallas, Texas, and I started getting a publication called The Examiner, and it was published by Charles Hope. Did y'all get that back in the 80s? I didn't even know him at the time. I learned about him. He preached up in North Alabama, did a lot of good during the 50s over institutionalism. But from what I've understood from people who knew Brother Holt, this is Charles Holt, he got kind of mistreated by some elders in a local church or two. And he just kind of had it in for elders. And so he developed the thinking, and he pushed it in this paper, which was called The Examiner. And I got it, and in every issue, there was something about the rule of elders, and how he said, elders get over here and they just write checks and they think they're the big thing and they can fire and hire and all that. That's what I was referring to here. And some others who don't take it as far as he did, they object to elders having any rule over churches due to these passages here. I've heard these passages quoted, Matthew 20, 26 through 28, that the Gentiles count people as great who rule over them and have authority. Not so among you. And so they say, well, see, elders don't have any right for any kind of authority at all. They can never make a decision unless a majority of members agrees with them. And their idea is that the leadership is only by example. That was Brother Holt's thinking. I think I've still got some of his articles in the back here. But only by example. However, while Peter cautions elders not to lord it over the charge allotted to you, but making yourselves ensamples or examples to the flock, 1 Peter 5, the same passage says that they are to exercise the oversight. And that word oversight or overseership is really the same word here, episcopus, that's for bishop. A bishop is an episcopus from that idea. They're to exercise oversight, 1 Peter 5. The church is not a democracy. It's not majority rules. In fact, if anything, it would be elder rule. And elders, how should I say it? The general meaning of the word elder means what? Older. God, even in the Old Testament, God placed leadership among those who were older. Supposed to be wiser, maybe more intelligent or studied. And so elders signifies older men. Elders are taught to rule. Obey them that have the rule over you. Men who spoken to you the word of God and considering the issue of their life, imitate their faith. So they are to have the rule. And in the same thing in a little different language in verse 17. And in 1 Timothy 5 verse 17, The elders that rule well should be counted worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in the word and teaching. So elders are taught to rule and exercise oversight. Main idea of what bishops or overseers means. And it's interesting, in 1 Timothy 3 verse 5, elders are said there that if an elder knows not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the what? The church of God. And so he is to rule in the house. But I think it to be that his rule in the house is similar to the rule in the church. It's not a dictatorial rule any more than a husband is to rule his house as a dictator. Love, care for wife and children are paramount. Similarly, love and care for a flock should be paramount. Yet when a problem arises or a decision is made contrary to the wishes of some, all are to respect that decision as long as no principle of right is violated. Elders are not to legislate, but adjudicate what God has already legislated. They simply, if you wanted to make a comparison to our government, God has legislated, but elders function like the court system. We adjudicate, so to speak. Here is the will of God. We're going to have to carry it out. Now, how should we carry it out? We're to meet on the first day of the week. Well, we know that. Well, how are we going to meet? Where are we going to meet? When are we going to meet? Those are things we have to, and elders y'all know all that. But, if it's a matter of principle at stake, then we're to obey God, not men. But I wanted to really emphasize that, guys, because this passage has been, in my thinking, misused a lot in my life to try to minimize the work that elders do. Does that mean they don't listen to people? No. Does that mean that they shouldn't have business meetings? No. But it does mean that once a problem comes and some decision has to be made, somebody's got to do it. And if you took a majority rule idea, then why have elders to start with? Just vote on everything. And you know what's wrong with voting? Everybody knows what's wrong with voting in the church? Charlie? A person who's 15 years old has just as much weight in what he says as somebody who's 75 and studied the Bible. That it does not take into consideration experience, wisdom, or judgment. Voting we ought not to ever think voting in the church is right. It's not right on any score. But anyway, I wanted to put that in. Comment or question, anybody? David, you look like you wanted to say something else. Anybody? Brother Gene?
It's not a democracy.
That's right. It is. The church is not a democracy. And when brethren think, and I know Brother Gene and I and others have seen this, if we think that we can gather a little coalition against a decision elders have made, then we're really in bad trouble, because what we're doing is we're stirring up a faction in a church. And I've done this before, if I am concerned about a decision elders make, who's responsible for talking with them? A big group that I can try to, or number one, let me go by myself and not try to put pressure by numbers. That's sometimes called coercion. You don't coerce elders into doing something just by sheer numbers. Anyway, very applicable on all this. Yes, sir.
I think it's quite important in our business meetings, all the men agree.
Yes.
On everything we do.
There needs to be unanimity. There just needs to be that. And I'm reminded that you all speak the same thing, that there be no divisions among you, that you be perfected together in the same mind and in the same judgment, 1 Corinthians 1:10. And so that's what we ought to grow toward. And okay, comment, anybody? All right. One other thing here. Greatness in God's kingdom is defined by serving, which is becoming more like Jesus Christ, unlike worldly kingdoms and organizations. Worldly organizations, kingdoms are impressed with authority and rule, count greatness in that way. It's difficult to see a larger difference between Christ's spiritual kingdom and the kingdoms of men than what Jesus here expresses. Service can come in many forms. Men serve or should serve as they lead, but men who do not or cannot lead in the church can and should serve in whatever capacity they're able. Women serve when they provide for their families, their husbands, when they do what they can for others, when they teach, help, encourage, warn in divinely appointed areas. When a lady takes somebody aside and says, I'm concerned about you. Now they're serving. They're serving God, you know. And it's been my observation that the feminist movement, when I was growing up, you know, it was called the Women's Lib. Diane Friedman and some others who were pushing that idea. And we're not talking about unequal pay if a woman does something, a man does, there ought to be equal, but that's not it. That's not what they're pushing. They're pushing to have women basically take over leadership roles. And that's exactly what Jesus has done. You know, cause that this my son over here be on your right hand and this on your left. Leaders, you know. And that these people believe true greatness can only be achieved when women are put in positions of power and leadership over men. And up to that time, they desire to be considered among the oppressed and minorities. Until and unless they have leadership positions, especially governmental, which are seen and become renowned. They're on TV and all that. And Jesus said true greatness is learning to do what? To serve. Is learning to serve. Okay. Any comment on that? I think about my little grandmother, and she was little to me. She was 5 feet. I remember one of the last years, she was maybe 2 or 3 years before she died. I picked her up almost like a baby. She's about 5 feet tall, and carried her to the car to get her in the hospital. Anyway, I say that she was small of stature, but man, she was so big in my heart. She gave her life to serving her family and my granddaddy, and rearing my 3 uncles and my mother, and making pies and cakes and doing for people. That's just that was her life. And people think sometimes, well, if I get a name for myself, or if I'm on the city council, and that's great, or if I'm a president. This woman who was, what's her name? Claire Gay, that was up at Harvard, y'all remember that just a few weeks ago? She was charged with plagiarism. And considered, that's we're doing well. And we're not talking about that women are inferior. Women are different. Nobody's inferior, and that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about different roles, and we want to do the very best we can in the roles God has assigned.
So many times you don't know somebody's greatness really till after they pass.
Oh, yeah.
All the things that they've done.
Yes.
And you didn't know that they were doing it.
Exactly. I've told y'all so many times, I guess, but a fellow who was meaningful to me up in North Alabama preached a little lady's funeral. She was about 4'11". I say little. I don't mean that. She was 4'11". She reared about 7 kids, and it was during the time when Bill Clinton was president. And he said at her funeral that said she had more influence for good than Bill Clinton would ever think about. She did, and who knows her name? She was one of the Sandlins, and it's a family in western Limestone County. But nonetheless, I just say that the kind of influence that she had was great. And so we don't ever want to discount the kind of influence we have in our family and in our sphere of, you know, friends that we influence for good. Don't ever discount that, guys, and encourage people. You look like you were saying something.
I just think about what Dave said about it. We never see it, and that's what makes it great.
Yes.
You know about it later, never see what's going on.
Yeah.
But everybody else is seeing it.
And they see it, yes. And I know all of you have illustrations you could add to what we've already talked about in your lives, that people who, it's kind of like Lincoln said at the Gettysburg Address, the world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. The world will little note nor long remember what we say. Of course, it has. But the song we sometimes sing, as a life of a flower, you know, that's meaningful on these lines. Okay. Anybody else? Thank you for your help.